What's up, everybody? This is Frederick Douglass Bussey. I am excited to bring you another edition of the Power Lunch Podcast. We are going to have an amazing guest with us today, somebody who has accomplished so many great things as an entrepreneur, a visionary, creative savant in every sense of the word. And so I can't really wait to share with you his story, and hopefully you'll be inspired and empowered through everything we have to talk about today. That being said, let's go. So I'm super excited to welcome our guest for today. He is what it says on his website is that he is a artist, globetrotting speaker, a market seeker, a storyteller who identifies emerging trends and inspires clients to think differently. He's definitely all of that and more. I'm talking about none other than Shingy, as he is known, Mr. David Shing.
Frederick, what's up, brother? So good to see you, man.
Likewise. I love. I wore my jacket for you because I know that you were going to come in full rock star. You got the hair to match as always.
I feel you, brother.
I feel like if you cut your hair, would people even know who you are? Do you feel that way sometimes?
I think there could be a Samson Delilah sort of vibe there, man. But I think about it every day. But I'm one of 10 kids, and one of my sisters is a hairdresser, so I've had kind of wacky do hair all my life, and people are like, oh, your hair's kind of crazy. I'm like, no, it's just how it all started. It all started because of the influence of my sister, brother.
Right. Well, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let's let everybody know a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll kind of dive into that whole story.
Yeah, let's do it, brother.
Yeah.
So it's amazing because we had met as the pandemic was still rocking along in Clubhouse. And what's amazing about that is, you connect with people that I wouldn't necessarily have associated with, but we did around topics that we cared about. And at that time, people just wanted to connect, and they wanted to understand where they're going, what their vibration is going to be. Is everything going to be cool? And it was a great opportunity to meet people like you, man, and to spend time in your hemisphere is just an honor. So what I tend to do is during the pandemic, I got to kind of understand that the values of what I did were being reset. So I have 3 parts I used to talk about it all the time about what I believe people should be. And I decided to have a crack at it. So as a polymath, as somebody who has many, many different interests as you do, we splinter into these spaces and hope that some of it could be commercialized. So I end up spending time. I have a brand consultancy practice where I help reboot brands and get them right their ship, typically of an entire strategy for them, from iconography all the way to strategy and the other side of it, which is things that I used to do at AOL when I ran media and marketing for them. And then the flip side of that is I also am an advisor, and I get to speak and educate across some of the biggest sort of platforms on planet Earth. So this year alone, I did a NFT, blockchain, Web3, metaversey kind of vibe in the Middle East. I did one of those, of course. I've done a couple of those. I spoke at one of the largest HR conferences in the world, which is also a privilege about the future of work. I do a lot of work with sort of evolving technology. So that's sort of more my private work. I'd spent some time at the Festival of Creativity in Cannes, where I spent, about 6 hours educating these things called the Young Lions, all these incredible next generation creatives on, what's emerging and how to just be better humans, really. And so I get to do a vast array of different things, and all of them I'm super interested in, and I'm very passionate about all of that.
I love your journey and how you swim in all these different types of waters, right? And you've always been a fascinating character for me. So this is kind of a personal way to kind of dive off into some of these different tangents that I feel like we can really pull so much wisdom and insight from you from. But let's talk about the beginning. You mentioned the fact that you are, a little bit about your upbringing, but talk about Shingy as a child. What was like growing up for you?
Yeah, it was. I had a crazy cool childhood. My dad was Chinese, my mum's Irish English. I'm born and raised in Australia, in the country. 9 hours north of Sydney and 3 hours inland. And I was one of 10 kids, mate, but I was raised in a Chinese restaurant. And,
Wow.
so we all grew up with Coca-Cola crates that we would walk around the restaurant, and when you stand on them and you can reach into the sink, you become the chief washer opera. At 15, you can be a bartender. So I had a bar license at that point where I was able to pull beers and serve wines and things like that young.
Mm,
I became a chef, pretty competent in the kitchen today. In fact, my younger brother, who's younger than I have two younger brothers. One of my younger brothers is a incredible chef in Australia, so he sort of kept the chefing legacy that my dad taught us. But it was
mm,
very much a life of lots of chaos,
mm,
because there's four boys at the bottom, and we're basically just called the four boys, or you boys, or you bloody boys, or whatever the hell was the context at the time. And it was a raucous of a life
mm.
until about the age of 11. And Frederick, I got hit by a car, and I got dragged for a couple of blocks, and I got airlifted to a
Wow.
different town, and I was in trouble. And I survived it, and I carried some real scars from it for a very long time, and I missed a bunch of school. And at that point, I think that moment for my parents, they just made a decision that if this kid was going to be that close to potentially not being with us, let's just let him do what he wants to do. And I think with
Mm,
that sort of freedom, Frederick, to be honest, it's a pretty intimate discussion to have, of course, this story. There are two things that could happen. Either I could run away and run off into the woods and be a skylark and party my ass off because I had all that freedom, or I could go the other
mhm,
way, which is what I did. I ended up exploring all of my sort of creativeness. So my interests in photography and fashion and design. I was a radio DJ. I was a disc jockey at a nightclub. I was a chef, at my dad's restaurant. I was selling Levi's jeans. I mean, there was a bunch of things. I was hosting fashion shows. There was a bunch of stuff that I was doing as a kid. And it
mm,
really sort of spoke to that polymath. And by the way, the reason I'm called Shingy is not because I made that bullshit up. I mean, it's because as Australians, we either elongate or truncate somebody's name.
mm,
And all of my family were called Shingis. And people like, if we're walking downtown, they're like Shingy, we'd all look around. So it's a family nickname, but it's very much an Australianism. And what's
mm,
happened is that that kind of stuck with me the whole time throughout my entire life. And I had an opportunity to leave home and move to Sydney, study design. I'm a classically trained graphic designer. I'm a
mm,
massive fan of craft. So when I look behind you, I love the kerning that's happening on that typography of what is a Futura font, extra bold. And
mhm,
we could talk about kerning and fonts all my life, mate, because I'm classically trained, so I'm old school. And I love the symmetry of the everything you got going on behind your winged chair. And
mm,
and given I love craft, it was something that am super passionate about. But I had the opportunity to be a young creative for many years as a guy who was working in iconography and brand, and then help invent some internet technologies in my early 20s, and moved a company to New York. Back in the days, it was just called the internet. Today they'd call it Web One,
mm. Right.
and I barely survived it, but I did. Mm.
Um, you talked about the fact that you chose around 15 to start taking these alternate paths, right? Just exploring down these different routes and kind of whatever tickled your fancy, you kind of dived off into. But was it your parents, or was it something else that kind of gave you the confidence to be able to lean into exploration? Because I'm sure you know this, right? Maybe in your talks with the young lions, or that the confidence to be creative is not something that is perpetuated in most people, right? A lot of people lack really finding that confidence. So what was it about you that at that young age allowed you to be able to do that?
Yeah, well, it wasn't. It didn't feel like confidence. Looking upon it now, it probably
Mm,
was. In fact, as I reconnected with some of my old schoolmates, the pandemic gave me the grace to do that. They
mm,
would always say, "Hey, we always thought you were uniquely different," and at the time, I
mm,
didn't. I just felt lonely, to be honest.
mm,
So I don't equate loneliness and confidence with the same thing, but to
You're right.
others, it did. And of course, I was never lonely because I had all my other siblings, but I also didn't have a lot of friends. And maybe that's because I felt like I was the cast of the Misfits toys all by myself. And
Mm,
I didn't really belong in any of these circles, brother. I'm not really built for sports, although I was a fast runner as a kid, but I really didn't have that team mentality. And because our family was so big, I didn't necessarily have a lot of friends. But what
mm,
I did have is a lot of curiosities. And so confidence for me came understanding of sort of these talents that I think we all have. By the way, I think we all have these natural tendencies for talent. It depends on whether you express them or not.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think there's a real value in making sure that anything you find fascinating, why don't you just go and spend some time actually doing it?
Mm-hmm.
So, I spent some time trying to learn to play the guitar. I sucked at it. I'm much better now, because I used to collect them, and then I thought, I've got all these guitars, I should probably learn how to play it. But as a kid, I would look at things like music and design and fashion and radio and all these things that I was super curious about. And it was my mom, really, who
Mm-hmm.
just said, you should just try them. And particularly if they were free, we didn't have much money. So I worked in a community radio, and I worked, I used to have a radio show after this guy who had a classical radio show. And I didn't really appreciate classical music as a kid. And his microphone used to smell of coffee because he'd go in with a thermos because he had the early shift. And it gave me this sense of, I knew who this person was just through those experiences. So I came in contact with things that were really unique at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They stayed with me. And, I think my mum was somebody who would just constantly say, go and try. And then one of my older sisters as well, who said, if you're interested in design, you should think about advertising. And she, by the way, she never really took those moments for herself, but she was able to identify it with me, I guess. And I just can't underscore this enough though, but me as a kid, I felt very lonely,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably not what you're expecting. I'm known as somebody who has I have a pretty wide persona. I'm very sort of opinionated on topics that I really care about, and I have a strong point of view around them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not my natural tendency. That's just because I'm passionate, and passionate and confidence aren't the same thing, in my opinion. I don't know whether you agree with that, and maybe it's different for you, brother, but that's definitely how I think about it.
I think, no, I do agree with you. And I never really thought about juxtaposing those two things together side by side before, but I think that many people confuse passion with confidence, right? It gives them a false sense of confidence. Well, because I'm passionate about it, I can talk about it, therefore I know about it, or I have the capability, right? And I always say to clients, confidence is a result, not a requirement. Confidence comes after the fact. And so I think passion I think we also think of passion the same way, the way that people talk about it. You got to have a passion. But many times you're not passionate about something when you begin. It develops as you lean into it. You discover the parts of it that really fascinate you, and things about that. And I love this because I really want to hear your philosophies on different things, because I think you do have such a wide perspective and you've done so many different things. I think that there's a lot of things that you can really share. How do you feel about that when people start talking about passion? You need to pursue your passion in life.
Yeah, I struggle with it, to be honest. Like
Mm,
I think it becomes just like you said. I think you dovetail into it based on things you're interested in, and you either
mm,
naturally gravitate towards it, or you become incredibly knowledgeable about it, and therefore you
mm.
have experience, and therefore you become better at it.
Right.
So, if you wanted to talk about fonts all day and, why did you choose Futura over Times New Roman and what's the kerning? That's because I'm knowledgeable, and I'm passionate about it because of my knowledge. So some of it
Hmm.
comes down to the curiosities, and do they land? But also, curiosity is probably a really underrated word. To be curious means
Mm,
that you're prepared to discover, and to discover means that you're prepared to be lateral. So
mm.
now's a perfect time. I know you have two kids. How many kids do you have, brother?
Three, three.
Three.
Mm-hmm.
What are they? All girls, couple of
10.
boys. What do you got?
I have the two oldest, the youngest and oldest are girls, 10 and 4, and my son is 6.
Six. So
Mm,
4, 6, and 10. So you've got the perfect combination there of seeing you're about to have one turning into a preteen. You've got one that's still kind of just out of toddlerville, really, and no longer a small kid. They're now properly a kid.
right.
They've gone out
Right.
of baby mode. I have a 5-year-old daughter. So what we're
Mm,
blessed with is having a generation of kids that are, I hope, going to be in a place where curiosity is their life.
mm,
Where when we grew up, well, particularly when I grew up, it was this conformity is what mattered. And
mm,
even as though I was a quote unquote creative and a designer, it was all about conforming, and that's I kind of rallied against it. I mean, there was a time when I was sort of in my early 20s trying to figure out what I really wanted to be. And I was at that time in multimedia. This is pre-internet, really. It was
Mm-hmm.
this the internet was a baby. And it was amazing because I didn't quite know what I wanted. And I was walking around with three-piece suits on, being a creative director. And it just was weird, dude. And it just wasn't me. And it felt very uncomfortable, but I felt like I needed to do that to be taken seriously. Well, now,
Mm-hmm.
if people can be who they are and they can express in the ways they are, and I mean that physically, spiritually, dynamically,
Mm-hmm.
this is the best time to do it in, man.
Yeah.
So I think all of this rattling to say, and this long diatribe of nothing, is to say that I think I would replace passion with curiosity, and
Mm-hmm.
also because I think passion becomes an output. And I think passion, when somebody says, "What are you passionate about, Shingy?" I've got 50 things I'm passionate about, and that seems too intense. So if I'm passionate about 50 things, then how can I be passionate about which one is the priority? I'm like, well, they're all a priority. Well, that's a bit intense.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually probably more curious about most of them, and I'm super passionate about things that at the time are more contextually relevant to where I'm at. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just because I become a subject matter expert in certain dimensions doesn't mean I'm not curious about other things. So curiosity, I think, is kind of, I'd love to see that more. I also found something very interesting culturally when I moved to America. I remember
Mm-hmm.
doing these presentations, and that's part of my living. People, I come on stage, and people are like, "Shingy, you killed it. You crushed that. Man, you really know how to hustle." I'm like, whoa, 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 back up. Look,
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about love, creativity, empathy. I'm just presenting, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm doing it with passion and I'm super salty. I get it. But I'm not crushing, killing, or destroying anything, man. I'm just trying to maintain in this whole situation. So culturally it was
Yeah.
kind of hard for me to figure that out, man. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think that's also, it's just important for us to, understand that humans to fulfill need, we have this innate curiosity that can be channeled into things that become passions, because I think you just become better at it. I think. Good question. I mean, I don't know. I didn't know where this conversation was going to go today, brother. I knew it was going to go all over the place, but I love the fact that you're asking me questions that I don't often sit and ponder. So thank you for that.
Well, I think you are the type of person. What's interesting about you, and I love like following your Instagram feed, is that the way you take pictures, the way that you showcase them. If you followed David Shingy on, it's Shingy at Shingy, right? On
Well,
Instagram,
on Instagram, I'm David Shingy.
David
I used
Shingy.
to have Shingy and I forgot the password, got locked down, and then somebody nabbed it, which is ironic because I also don't know my Wikipedia page either because somebody did the same thing. But that
Wow.
just happens with trolls, God bless them. So I'm David Shingy, but I'm shingy.com otherwise, but I'm pretty easily found. But
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
my Instagram though, brother, is that, at some point I went back to this is being a craftsperson, right? So I studied photography as a kid,
Mm,
and I used to just publish content willy nilly and publish content on all the platforms, just think whatever. And then I
mm,
thought, no, 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 these platforms are actually designed for different forms of communications.
right.
So Instagram for me is black and white. Facebook is catching up with people I don't necessarily care about much. It's just different. Like there's different platforms for different types of communications, right?
Mm, mm,
And my Instagram is black and white and a view to my life because I wanted to go back and use it as a different tool. And I used
mm,
to take photographs in black and white. So when you see me publish in black and white, I've actually taken that photograph in black and white. And when I go into things like my feeds, and
mm,
if I do any reels or if I do any stories and I shoot in color, it's because I've shot in color. So because the
mm,
tool allows me to do it, I'm super curious about what these tools can do. So I'll express differently. I'm not like, oh, I'll just take a photo and post it out. It's like, no, I'm going to shoot in black and white. And I'm going to shoot this, and this is particularly going to be for my story. So if you went back far enough, and by the way, pre-pandemic, there's a point where I removed all of my content, like a ton of content went away. I just decided to
mm,
get rid of it. I just didn't want it all. I thought, bugger this. I'm going to change my point of view. I'm going to do a total reinvention, blah, blah, blah. And then I realized there's a pandemic. I need to communicate to some of my friends. I'm going to do it in a way I'm used to. But if you went
mm.
far enough back in my Instagram, there's color. And that's where I just decided I'm going to change that. It was a record scratch for me. But yeah, anyway.
You brought up a couple of interesting points. One is that different platforms are built for different types of communication, and we talk about social media as a blanket kind of thing. But you've got Discord, you've got Facebook, you've got TikTok, you've got Instagram, and you find LinkedIn, even you find that people behave differently on different platforms because they're designed for different things. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the idea of being a creator, or creating expression, right? Whether it's through your business, whether it's through your personal creativity or artistry, whatever. Could you talk about how people can discover how to show up powerfully in multiple ways, right? Because you mentioned like going to
Yeah.
work with a suit on, right? And that certainly you could wear a suit. I'm sure that you had impeccable taste. You looked good in it, even though it didn't necessarily feel 100% authentic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, but how do people do that? Because a lot of people feel like they're kind of trying to shape shift, or code switch into different environments. And I think social media is a perfect example of how we all do that without even thinking about
Yeah, well, look, and it's not just people, brands do the same thing. So we all fall into
it.
this
Hmm.
human nature of, create once, publish everywhere. And then we're
Hmm.
flabbergasted when engagement doesn't happen, particularly if you represent a brand. The
Right.
truth is, it's about context, brother. And
Hmm.
each one of these platforms are designed to communicate differently. And the challenge with that is we don't all have time to communicate in them. So do an audit of your personal brand and find out where people engage best and spend more time there. So in
Hmm.
places like Discord, I get to lurk. In places like Twitter, I get to observe. I used to participate, but I stopped
Hmm.
participating because in 2014, the internet started hating on me because I was a bit strange looking. Weird Chinese dude with a title called The Digital Prophet that wears black nail polish working for AOL messed with people's heads because I turned up on a TV show called the MSNBC's The Cycle, which was
Hmm.
really designed for meat and potatoes America. And it freaked them out, dude. They couldn't reconcile with it. And I was trending
Hmm.
more than Sochi Olympics. And when you do that, you become pretty obvious and people start to either love you or hate you. Frederick,
Right.
I'm very aware either people love me or hate me. They're not like, yeah, that Shingy dude, he's okay. Uh-uh. I'm polarizing and I get it.
Hmm.
But what's amazing for me is that there aren't enough people spending time in the channels which edify them in a way that says, this is really powerful for me. So I'm going to spend more
Hmm.
time in it. I think I think the younger generation, kids today, definitely understand that with platforms like TikTok. And TikTok is not social. TikTok is
Hmm.
fundamentally the next generation of entertainment,
Hmm.
and so is YouTube. In fact, that's where all the kids are spending their time in. It's not
Hmm.
about the polish of Instagram or the communication of Facebook or the wittiness of Twitter or the filtration of Snapchat or the collection of Pinterest or it's all of those and
Hmm.
none of them if you don't necessarily need to participate.
Right.
So the other thing that you need to reconcile with is it's not a popularity contest. These are
Hmm.
all communication tools. If you want to do mass amplification, there are ways to do that. In fact, these platforms teach you ways to become popular in them. These
Hmm.
platforms teach you the way that the algorithm is going to pick you up because you do more reels in Instagram or more it's live or in TikTok it's all about green screen and doing this with a weird looking microphone that does that and you're scouring the internet for things that are interesting and amplifying it over it because you're an opinionator or you split the
Hmm.
screen and it's like that's homogenization. So what you end up with is a lot of content kind of all looks the same
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it takes dudes like you and I, brother, to carve out that and say, hey, if I'm in craft and I'm a creative, I'm going to do it in a way that I feel like represents who I am, not
Right.
necessarily representative of the platform. So therefore, in some of these, I'm not going to be popular, and I'm okay with that. But using the context of those platforms for how they're utilized, how it suits you best, is really important. But one thing that I did in about 14, when the internet was hating on me, a very, very dear friend of mine, one of my oldest mates on planet Earth, is the songwriter Gavin DeGraw. And Gav, he and I did an onstage interview, and I was, it's great. I get to interview some of my mates, and he had an album coming out, and we're catching up, and he goes, "So what's going on?" I'm like, the internet's hating on me right now, dude. So I just want to curl up in a ball. And he goes, "Well, why don't you just go where you're celebrated?" And I
Mm.
sat back and thought, "Oh, you little shit! That is one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had, and that's going to stay with me for life." Because
Mm.
it just completely took all anxiety out of the way and just said, "Oh, it is a choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow." Wow, I really needed that reset, man, and it has stayed with me, and, that guy I get to call a dear friend forever, and he helped me out of a bind in a way that nobody else could. So, yeah, just it's that simple.
I love that because I think that there is this conditioning maybe, or this notion in our heads that we have to try and win people over. Like that's the point, right? Win them over. They hate you. Let's prove to them that you're worthy. But I'm curious. You took that bit of advice. Where did you feel like you had either forgotten where you were celebrated, or you discovered maybe in a new way this different element or this different realm where you could
Mm.
really shine?
Yeah, I love this question. And you know what's amazing, and one of the things that allowed me to crash the internet was that I said that defriend unfollow would be a trend,
Mm,
and this is the height of popular social networks. And what I said was the context of that is very simply this, and at the time I would ask audiences who has Instagram, or the hands go up, who has Instagram that's private. About 80% of the hands would stay up. And I would say to myself, okay, so, but you still communicate there, right? You're still messaging, you do those things. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So intimacy happens in closed, interconnected networks. And that's
mm,
important. So where did it happen? In DMs, and it happened in all the platforms that wasn't necessarily public. Because if you're going to stand, and it's, by the way, that's all, that landscape's also shifted right now, which is if somebody's getting hated on, and we're now in a place where people can be defended, and that's great
mm.
because the public, the court of public law is weirder now, but it's
Yeah.
better because people will stand up for you and say, "Hey, don't throw shade because we're going to throw it back at you." We're back, like in 14, as I said, it was when that was happening. The beautiful confidence of me feeling whole came from intimacy, those closed networks, and that's where I still feel it today, and it's
Mm,
amazing for that. But it happens in places where the true intimacy can happen. It's human to human. But one thing I wanted to say, as part of your comment, you said that you're wanting to change people's opinions potentially. I would say potentially, and here's why.
mm,
I don't know about you, and this is particularly physical. It's just different. When you meet somebody, I think within milliseconds, when you shake somebody's hand or you meet somebody, you'll know immediately whether you like that person or not, or whether you're going to
mm,
spend time with them, whether you think they're a worthy to really engage with. There's something about human nature. The
mhm,
good thing is we can also build some of that empathy through these networks by understanding that if I follow this people's content and I
mhm,
am rewarded by it because that makes me feel great, or I get a view of their life, we align with our belief systems, all those things can be done by having this commentary before you get to them. Then there's
mhm,
already there's like this warm introduction. And I mean, I felt that with you immediately. And yeah, but if we met face to face, if that was our first contact and it wasn't this whole digital hemisphere,
mhm,
I would have felt that. And I'll know that, hey man, if you need anything, just you can call me anytime and I'm there for you. But if it was like I felt like I had to, if I didn't feel that and I felt like I had to sort of convince you, then find another audience.
mhm,
Find another group of friends, man, that get you. And that for me is incredibly important. I had the good fortune in my career being a very odd dude with a pretty high profile executive position at AOL
mhm,
by one, initially working for a friend, and two, becoming incredibly trusted by a young female executive who really believed in me, who
mm,
said, I know you've got incredible experience. Can you channel that towards media? And I said, absolutely, I can. But I'm going to fill that gap by hiring well. So I hired this incredible editor she used to be the editor of Vogue in the UK, and she knew nothing about digital. And I know
mhm,
all about digital. I knew nothing about publishing. So I brought her on to teach me the gap. So we had this two-way relationship on it. And she went off to run Digital Women's Daily, which is crazy. So she's amazing in her
mm,
own right. But I had these very strong younger women help empower me, which I thought would be the other way around if I was thinking about my masculine self. And then ultimately, my boss at AOL, who was Tim Armstrong, his career was boosted at Google.
mhm,
He gave me a wide berth to be somebody who was culturally relevant to an industry that really needed it. And he
mhm,
just trusted that the value that I was providing would be good for the brand. So finding people in your life who really do support you, values, your understanding, your opportunities, because if people turn around and say, what is it that you do? The question really is, what is it that you need?
mm.
And if you fit that and you're able to do that in the context of your superpower, then that's the economy I want to participate in. But
Yeah.
half the time we're just striving to figure out what my catchphrase is, man. You know?
You said, well, first of all, you say so many different things. There's so many different paths I could wander down. But I want to harken back to something that you said earlier, which was about intimacy, which is not a word that people think a lot about when they are talking about social media or business, right? So we talk about relationships, we talk about networking, we talk about connecting, but intimacy is the highest level, the highest form of human connection, right? Typically, you think about that in terms of a marriage or a long term partnership. How do you think about that in terms of connecting with people and how? Because I get the sense that this is something that is really meaningful to you. And I guess a secondary question to that, if I can ask it, is do you feel as though that loneliness that you felt when you were 15 years old is kind of something that created maybe a deeper longing to share intimacy with the world, if you will, or to promote this idea that we should be intimate, so that people can be seen and connected, and no one should be lonely?
Yeah, that's a great question for that's a great dinner drinking question for sure. So on a Thursday afternoon, the context is throwing me off. But let me just
I
say that
understand.
I love where it goes because there are a couple of things that I think are pertinent here.
Hmm.
The quick answer is yes. I believe that to be true, and it's a really good observation. However, because I know what it's like to not fit in, brother, and when somebody cares enough to actually uh, understand what your superpower could be, because you're
Hmm.
not confident enough to grasp it,
Hmm.
that's lifelong, and that's empowerment. And I've
Hmm.
had a couple of those people come into my life. Some people could call them angels, right? They just happen to have flesh and bone around them. God bless. But what I think is really valuable here, and by the way, I've had people ping me still quite often saying, "You have changed the trajectory of my career.
Hmm.
Seeing you speak, you made me seen."
Hmm.
And the way you approached me afterwards, the way that we got to connect at a happy hour or whatever, at a mixer, or you were the only one who cared about what I did. And these, by the way, at the time, these are kids early in their career, and I'm making time to connect with them, knowing that somebody did that for me.
Hmm.
And guess what, mate? They've gone and get these big jobs. And it happened in Cannes when somebody came up to me, got this massive hug, and said, "Because of you, I'm now the head of, communications over here, and I would have never have thought I could do that."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Whoa! I have not seen you in like 10 years. What are you talking about?" It was a delicious moment that
Hmm.
the encounter was that impactful, and I bloody mean it. I mean, it was really impactful for me too.
Hmm.
But the thing is this human to human relationship. That is how business works.
Right.
So if you look at the culture today of everybody is an entrepreneur, everybody can be the CEO of their own organization. There's the ability for you to be able to, do all these incredible things. Yes, they can, but it ultimately, I think, human to human contacts and people buying from humans is still the most important thing to me.
Hmm.
And those relationships are earned. But also, the way you earn that is by not just taking an interest, but being interesting because you understand that you've done the research perhaps on the things that they care about. And so you come into it aligned. That's
Hmm.
particularly if you're doing that in business. I mean, that's 101. Do the homework, do the research. And if you don't do the research, don't bother calling or speaking to me. But
Right.
on the flip side of that, on the personal side, you very quickly get a feel if people are going to align with you or not. And I mean that from a kind of an intimacy perspective. And I'm not downplaying intimacy. Yes, it feels like you keep that for, say, a love relationship. Yeah. But intimacy it can still be formed, I believe, in these relationships. And it can happen
Hmm.
even in these digital networks because it feels like this person understands what I do, they appreciate what I provide, and they care to engage. When people reach out and say, "Hey, man, you make me feel great," I look at your Instagram feed and you make me calm. Or
Hmm.
somebody pinged me recently said, "The way you curate music on your stories makes me want to create a whole new playlist." I'm like, "Yeah, that's because I'm super interested in music."
Right.
It's very simple to me, and not just one genre, which also speaks to me. So I don't know, man. I have faith that we're going in a place, particularly in a world that feels very polarized
Hmm.
today,
Hmm.
that there are these beautiful moments that can happen if people just care. And caring is a direct, I believe, output of a very vulnerable moment of the last couple of years, going through a space where we're all flatlined.
Yeah.
And Frederick, it's interesting because pre-pandemic, it probably would have been very hard for you and I to find time. And the reason why I say that is that I'd be jumping on a plane or too distracted, or I'd see him like, yeah, I'd love to connect with you sometime. Let me write that down. I'll do that on the 12th and never. Where, I will bump into people in New York now and just say, hey, do you have time? Like, yes, now,
Yes.
let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go grab a tea right now. Because this moment there's a reason for this. This is
Hmm.
not a coincidence. We're here. We've not seen each other for a long time. Human contact is weird, I know, but you don't, unless you have to run somewhere let's be vulnerable.
Hmm.
Vulnerability and intimacy. How dare I say that? But I mean it. Why? Because we've just come through, 2 years of just the craziest shit, man. And
Hmm.
now we're at a place where you can reinstate all of those values that seemed like they were downplayed in these platforms.
Yeah.
And I think people are hungry for it, personally.
I absolutely agree. I think that what we're seeing across multiple genres is people have a craving to go deeper, to be led in a way that is meaningful, led towards things that are meaningful in their lives. Um, Now, because we have so many different silos, any person can be in a tribe of 5,000 people where they all explore this one thread of Game of Thrones or Pokemon or anime or whatever it is, and they can live there, right, completely, and feel completely seen and intimately connected with these strangers. And yet, we're also in a world where people increasingly don't know where to find the right answer, the truth, if you will, about things that are also meaningful and matter. So there's our versions of the truth for our own stories, and then there is, okay, what does gravity really exist? Is the world really flat or round? Is there, so there's all of these weird um conspiracies and or ideologies about what reality really even is, right? And so we're looking for leadership where people can tell us what really truth is. Who do we trust? And so I'm kind of circling around to asking the question for you, because in your work you really are a communicator, right? And so people are giving you feedback all the time that what you're communicating to them feels real, feels true. And in your work, how are you doing that with maybe the brands that you're working with to help them to understand their responsibility as a communicator, not just to sell things or promote themselves, but to actually provide a sort of leadership in the world
Yeah,
around
great,
what's true?
great question. Well, so look, in that it's heady because there are a couple of things that have to happen. It's like an almost a reset of
Mm,
values and the mission and purpose and all these things that seem very soft but are incredibly important.
mm,
Because if, let's say, the middle part of an organization or of a brand doesn't believe in those or feel those, then how can the head and the tail follow?
mm,
And so, given that, there's kind of this reset that has to happen. And one of it is understanding that whatever is that purpose, firstly, distill it down to something that's really succinct. People will call it a tagline, but that is something that's believable and it's aspirational enough that you can live up to it and grow into it and be inspired by it. Not something that feels like it was built in a boardroom by a bunch of white people, for example. It doesn't work like that, brother.
mm,
So it also has to be a reflective. Your brand is actually not owned by yours typically. It's a reflection of the people that consume it. And there's a reason they're
mm,
passionate about it. So they are the voice of that brand. You are just a custodian to make sure their voice is heard and amplified. And in
I
addition
like
to that, it also comes back down to DNA. Too many times people are looking for a shiny object. So whether that's the new, verbiage around Web3, or whether it's the shiny object around entertainment and social platforms, and spending too much time on the what, and they forget about the why, and they forget
mhm,
about their own DNA.
mm,
And they start to act like these kids, and it just doesn't seem to work. So, part of what I do, which is very strange for me to say, is I become, the person that's the sage advice, and not just the crazy guy who just helps them reinstate their purpose, values, missions, and also their relevancy to an audience, and do they deserve it? because I will
Mm,
tell you right now, in the next 18 months, 2 years, we will see more brands, physical and digitally launched in our entire lifetime. Why?
mm,
Because the tools are there to do it. It's much easier to do it today. It's democratized. The path to failure and success is faster and less expensive than it used to be back in the day.
mhm,
And people's willingness to switch brands based on, whether it aligns with values, etc. It's a completely different cultural change. So some of it's self-fulfilling, meaning the audiences that are new audiences that are growing up with these different values are telling us that if you do not get your whole mess sorted, we're going to move on. We'll just go around you.
mm,
So those
mm.
opportunities are for real. And by the way, that could be my opinion, but it's actually the audiences, and they're the ones who own your brand anyway. So get it together. So that's really what it
Yeah.
comes down to, man. And part of that, I reconcile, that in my own self, but I really do with the brands that I get to work with and the audiences I get to speak to. One of my jobs as somebody who gets to present is to make sure that people do better with the tools that I give them than they thought they'd have coming into it. So I'm inspiring them to be better than they were. And if I'm able to do that, then that's job well done. And if I'm able to do it in a way that gives them the context of where that relevancy happens, even better. If I get to participate them because they're smart brands, great. I'm happy and I'm here for that too, man. But yeah, it's a really interesting time, and think all of those things are being reset. So it's a great time to reset them.
What are some of the brands that you feel like get it right now that are kind of leading the way in terms of creating that intimacy of being great custodians of a message or a tribe or an idea even?
I mean, I think that I could speak to a number of different brands, and I'll give you a couple right now that you know of. Burger King's a good example. Burger King is a great example of a brand that gets it right. And what I mean by that is, several years ago, they brought meatless Impossible Burger to their menu. And I'm not a
Mhm,
massive consumer of their brands, by the way, but I believe in where they're headed.
mhm,
When you think Burger King, do you think plant-based? No, you don't. But they did it because they believe it's right, because of all of the greenhouse gases that get produced because of all of the all of the farming that happens around meat consumption. So
mhm,
they're pointing towards the future. So it's very future forward. On top of that, they're also very democratized with the way they think about their brand. So in Mexico, they did this beautiful campaign where they went out in the streets and found people actually eating Burger King at the time and said, "Do you mind if we photograph you?" So they're
mhm,
really showcasing the people that actually do own their brand. It's not some polished, fabulous looking model doing this thing, having a whopper on the side. No, no, it's actually these people who are workers or whatever, and they just told their stories. I thought that was really quite powerful. So that brand's really quite amazing. And then if you look at somebody like, somebody is as smart as Oreo. And I'm not a massive consumer of that brand either, but they did these incredible things where they were able to produce content at the speed of culture and make it relevant for every audience. So whether
mhm,
that was when the power went out in the Super Bowl and they did this thing called Dunk in the Dark, which seems old school now, but at the time was incredibly relevant.
mhm,
And they also have this twist and dunk game. So they're one of the few sort of CPG brands that have a mobile app that actually earns them money. That's very powerful for that audience. Or if you look at
mhm,
the remarkable work that Adidas have done, particularly launching into the metaverse and around NFTs, and the way they did it in this beautiful way that felt core to their DNA. And
mhm,
for me, it made me think back to them when they were supporting people like Run DMC back in the 80s.
mhm,
What they
mhm,
did for Web3 was even just as equally relevant. So it really updated that brand. And the flip side of that, the competitor Nike has done an incredible job of saying, I take a very masculine tagline, like just do it, which I think is incredibly masculine. And
mhm,
they've created these self-effacing experiences where it's like, if you suck at doing all these sports, at least you're participating, because
right.
everybody's an athlete is the dot dot dot. Another brand that I think has done an incredible job of understanding how to communicate in a way that's very human is Oakley, the alternative milk. And what I
Mm,
love about
mhm,
that is they were a little brand out of the Nordics, and they were in, the first thing they decided to do was publish in English. They changed their whole iconography to be something that felt very sort of accessible and fun. And I'm talking about a bloody carton of milk, mate. But every time you try and buy that, or alternate milk, every time you try and go into a cafe or go and buy it, the shelves are empty. They can
mhm,
never keep up with demand because they've
mhm,
created a groundswell around this brand which is just culturally in tune. Now, some would argue that all their ingredients aren't amazing and whatever, and they will sort that out. But to be able to captivate a massive industry like the milk industry and reframe it is incredible. They even put their carbon footprint on the carton, which, by the
Mm.
way, kids care about. And our kids, brother, are going to care about that more and more. So they're already in. And then
Yeah.
you've got a brand like, we'll always talk about the poster brand of Patagonia, where Mother Nature is the only investor. Oh,
Mm.
hello.
Yeah.
My goodness, man. And I look at that brand and think, but they've been doing this forever. They're a certified B Corp. The only
Mm.
thing that you'll see that people, and they've always got a sustainability element to them. When people take a dig at that brand, well, I'll give you two reasons. Most people will take a dig at that brand because they're not completely vegan. So they still use leathers in some of their products. But why I would take a dig at their brand, the designs just aren't that cool for me, boo. So that bothers me, So otherwise, I'm here for it, man. But I'm not here to walk around with a Patagonia vest on. It's going to look like that. So if we can get a great creative director in there that can up that design, then maybe cats like you and I will walk around with it more often. But there are just some brands that kind of always seem to understand, and they're not new. The new
Mm.
brands that are understanding how to actually captivate people have to understand how to sustain that. So
Right.
to sustain somebody's attention for over a longer period is hard, and a lot of them
Hmm.
get into the position where they have to fall back to tried and true techniques of engaging with people, and then they understand that there's a method to this. There's a reason why these brands that I just called out have been around a very long time, but they
Hmm.
work, and they
Hmm.
keep on changing their values to meet the culture of the consumer if they're relevant to them. Mm,
So I wanted to. You actually led me perfectly to talk about design
mm.
because, so you mentioned like my the stuff behind me, my
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, I feel you, brother.
and I love that. But so I have. It's interesting because I went to school for communications, and so it was TV, radio, film. But it was more because I was interested in pursuing a career in music. And so at the time that I was in college, there was only, there was no music. I mean, other than Berkeley, you couldn't really go to school for music,
Right.
right, to be a producer or a songwriter or something like that. And I actually didn't major in that because my, I felt this pull. I wanted to be Diddy.
Yeah, I
I
get you.
really admired him and Russell Simmons. And so that was the clearest path I could see to do that. But over the past few years, I've become extremely fascinated with design. I went through this whole period where I was like really exploring fonts and trying to figure out, why does this look so clean? What does this communicate? How can a little serif or a sans serif font communicate something though very differently? And why does it communicate an entire age or an ethos, right? But you talked about the design, like we were talking about Patagonia. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the world, how you brought in photography and um, um, topography and all of these different things to be able to kind of inform the way that you talk to brands, yes, but also that maybe we as entrepreneurs or creatives can be thinking about how we can be really more specific and about what we communicate. Even to a price point, right? That a certain font communicates that
Yeah.
you're worth more
Yeah.
than others, right?
And it's a fascinating question because it's also incredibly loaded, right? Because
Mm.
taste is in the eye of the
Subjective,
beholder.
right?
Absolutely. But I can tell you that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Period, full
Mm.
stop. Every classic designer, whether it's fashion or even music, there's
Mhm.
simplicity in the way they think about it in 3/4 or 4/4 time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a mathematics to it, or I think it was Dior that said every morning take one thing off as you leave. So there's
Mm.
a simplicity to it, and it's fun. It's fascinating if you turn that around and you approach it that way. Simplified design means that there is less chaos, so people can actually be more chaotic in the way they approach it because it's simplified, and it
Mm.
allows it to breathe. It give people space. The more is more culture, of the 80s designs and the 70s designs can be influenced back into where we are today in fashion, music, culture, design,
Mhm.
but it isn't the same vibe. Now, what we're falling into a trap into, of course, when you think about metaverse, is the world of avatars means that because people are over indexing their expression engine, and which is their digital reality, you're also going to see that expressed in fashion because they're trying to keep up with the digital manifestation of that. And
Hmm.
technology allows you to do that because you can 3D print anything that you possibly could dream up. So
Right.
you're looking more like an avatar in the real world, which, by the way, in the 70s we called punk. So it's actually not that different. It's just been updated to today's vernacular and
Right.
today's design tools and language, brother.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating because there's just something about, and I would say this to everybody, which is just simplify things. Now, I look like
Hmm.
a hot mess, mate, but at some point in time, I understand what my silhouette is, and I just created this simple icon.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it turns up everywhere. I associate with people like Yeti because that's an alignment to a toughness and a rebelry that I believe in as well. Or my tote bag that I have is just it's part of my silhouette, but it's black on black because I will only want to give away stuff to people if it's something that I would want to use.
Right. Right.
So, you know,
Right.
I want to do it to a point where it's like if it doesn't reflect who I care about, then why would I expect somebody else to care about it?
Hmm.
You know? And so it is subjective, but here's something that I come back to this quote, and I believe it was Mies van der Rohe. Do you know who that is?
No, I don't.
Yeah, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe is the godfather of modern architecture. He's the
Mm.
guy who invented the design of the skyscraper. So if you ever go to the Seagram building in New York City, Mies van der Rohe designed it, Mies van der Rohe. And what he did, it's where the Four Seasons Hotel is. And in
Mm.
that building back in the day, the idea of it is that a skyscraper was designed to be elevated, but also that the area around it at the ground level was going to be public space. That's why it
Uh,
went up. Where
mm.
what happened now is that every skyscraper takes the entire city block up, and then you got this much footpath and this much building, and it's ridiculous.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
we'll go back to those simplified designs. But I'm telling you, this whole diatribe is that it matters so much that he coined this phrase, "The devil's in the detail."
Hmm.
And what I mean by that, if you have this beautiful idea of simplicity, the detail to get to simplified design is incredibly difficult. So
Hmm.
even this, you go into a workplace and people are in this workplace that looks very beautiful until you put people in it. Now it looks like this chaotic mess.
Hmm.
Somebody's sitting too close to the window. They pull up their blind. Somebody else over there pulls down their blind. And so he had this principle in his buildings, which is either all blinds up or all blinds down or all blinds set to halfway. And the reason for that is inside the business and outside the business, everything else in those environments is chaotic. And it kills the
Hmm.
energy inside and outside of the offices by seeing these jigger jaggies in the room. So I've done many boardroom presentations as I can attest to in my career, and every time I'm in those, I will walk around and just quietly put all the blinds at the same space because it messes with my rods and cones. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
even that sort of thoughtful design is incredible. Oh, another example of it. It's a phrase I call designologue. If you can design to a point that creates a dialogue,
Hmm.
whether that's a font you use or the color of your red chair that you've got on your wingback, or whether it's for me, I either use black or white for everything that I use, and I've got this spot of shingy green in my website because I've had that green with me. It's on my album. I have a music album, and it's been that green's been with me for probably 40 years.
Hmm.
And what's interesting for me with a designer log, it can be as conscious as a toothpick. Frederick, have you never noticed that a little wooden toothpick, has got this kind of little weird thing at the end, like a little barbell? You ever notice that thing? It's got these little
Hmm.
indentations at the end.
Hmm.
You know what it's for?
Hmm.
Okay, so the toothpick, it's rumored, was invented by the Japanese. And if you take that toothpick, you snap that little barbell off at the top, it becomes a rest for your toothpick because you've got a rest for your chopstick, you've got a rest for your bowl. It's conscious design, and even as something
Hmm.
as naff as a toothpick. So everything has to have a conscious design.
Yes.
Everything has to have a conscious design. Why is that confirmed? Because otherwise, there's so much chaos. You can't create any calm.
Right.
And you need that calm to be able to be chaotic, to be able to have opinions, to be able to be more creative and expressive. But it's got to start with that idea of simplicity. And there's one book I'm going to recommend to you that you should get your hands on, just because
Mm.
it's here on my desk all the time. You see my greyhound, isn't she a honey?
That
There's
was
this
lovely.
like these books, mate, these little tiny book about inspiration of this, for me, I just pick
Uh,
it up to thumb through and think, yes, I can Google this rubbish, but why would I do that when I can thumb through one of these little books of inspo and just feel like that's kind of what I needed. I
mm.
need these little bits of brevity, that helps to
Yes.
breathe.
You Our time is flying here.
Yeah, man, I
And
know.
I have so many questions, but one of the things that you talked about, and I love this as well, is how a great slogan can communicate. And you were
Mm,
talking about simplicity, how how brands and people need to be able to distill down these ideas
yes.
into a phrase that encapsulates something, right? So a lot of the quotes that I put on my page are actually something that I subconsciously wrote in a longer post, and I'm pulling out that idea, right? And I'm always experimenting with how it can bang people upside the head with simplicity. Can you talk about some of your favorite slogans, maybe some that you've come up with or coined, or ones that really resonate and communicate, and maybe also kind of talk a little bit about how you invert from complexity to simplicity, something that is
Mm,
a deeper meaning that resonates, but it's
yeah.
so simple, so clean.
Yeah. So, my favorite tagline of all time for any brand is Red Bull.
Mm. It
Energy
gives you
gives
one.
wings. And you ever notice there's three eyes in the wings?
It is. That's right. You're right.
Did you know why that's the case?
Mm-mm.
At some point in time in that slogan, that tagline, somebody sued Red Bull because their energy did not actually give them wings. So they inserted a couple of extra eyes in there. So it's actually not a real word.
Ah.
It's bloody genius, mate. And if I look at, so I think that's genius. And
Mhm.
I love other brands in terms of their taglines that allows them to extend their inspiration. BMW is the
Right.
ultimate driving machine. It
Mhm.
allows them to be the ultimate something else, and
Right.
they can drop the driving machine and it could be the ultimate environmental machine. I mean, there's something in there that says, wow, it's extremely extendable. I did a
Mhm.
tagline for an influencer technology agency out of San Francisco recently, and they had a very complex message. Influencer agency, right? Influencer technology, marketing, automated platforms, etc. And their tagline was this long tagline. And very quickly I said, actually, what you are is the calm and the chaos. So their tagline is calm in the chaos. And it just, for me, it gives them all
Mhm.
this ability now to understand that in the sea of influencer, if you're going to be the calm, you know, that would be the ultimate for them. So
Yeah.
look, brother, for me, again, it's this process of taking things that are very complex, distilling them down to human truth, and then allow it to extend in a way that inspires the brand moving forward. All day, every day, I'm here for it.
As we're getting ready to wrap up, what might be something that you would share? I'm actually kind of curious what you shared with your young lions. If there is an idea that you're really fascinated with right now that you would like to leave with the audience, something to
Mm.
send them off to explore, to be inspired, to create whatever that might be.
Yeah, so there are three things that I would say are pertinent to all of this, and I just want to recap that my favorite quote was the advice given to me by Gavin, and that is go where you're celebrated.
Mm,
So as this world seems to continue to be polarized, there are many places where you can be celebrated. So pursue those. Not all of us need to be in a dogfight of one. So go there.
right.
The second thing is I have this idea of H3, which is humility, humanity, and humor. I'm
Mm,
very keen on making sure those three H's are just part of my soul. They're also part of any brand that I would touch and help represent. And the last thing I would say is, just to understand that now is a time to form new habits and not to fall back into the old habits that we previously had pre-pandemic. There are going to be more pandemics, I believe, but I also believe that we will deal with them differently. So the moment we went through is incredibly unique. But to not learn from those and fall back into those old bad habits is a crying shame. When
mm,
people say to me, we're coming back, we're almost back to normal, I'm like, oh my God, I do not want any of that. I want different. I
mm-hmm,
want better. I
mm-hmm.
want purpose. I want love. I want create. And these younger audiences are helping to facilitate those. So,
Yeah.
hopefully those three things aren't too light and too fluffy for you, but that's where I'm at, man. And it's important for me. And what is her name? Which one is this?
This is this is my youngest, Alea, who wonders if it's snack
Hello,
time yet.
Alea. God bless
And
her.
say hi.
And she can't hear. She can't hear me though. That's the problem.
She
She's
can't.
got your
She can't
headphones on.
either.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And tell her it's snack time in about 2 minutes. How about that?
Snack time is soon. Okay, a couple of minutes, and then we're ready to go.
I love
All
that
right.
name, man.
My oldest daughter actually named her Nev. Named her youngest sister. So yeah,
Oh, I love that.
yeah.
I love that, man. Thanks for having me today, brother. It's been a privilege and an honor to catch up and to have what would feel like an intimate dinner with you and your core audience. I really appreciate and respect you, man. And
No,
you're the
I'm so
sharpest looking dude in the planet, as far as I'm concerned. Nobody can wear
well.
pink quite like you can.
Oh, I appreciate that. And coming from you, that's high praise. So I'm trying to grow my hair out, a little bit more, but I don't think I'm ever going to catch you.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it.
Shingy, it's been an honor, man. I really am grateful. One of our watchers is said they have 4 pages of notes, and
No,
I think that you've shared some really, really golden things here. I was excited because I didn't want to just do the technical. This is what I did. This is my resume. I really wanted to dig into your mind because I think that that is where the gold is. When
I
we can
appreciate it.
understand that mindset. Yeah. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much for
Thank you
being
so
with
much,
us.
man. Thanks for taking a
Absolutely.
minute. Take care,
Absolutely.
guys. Cheers,
Well,
brother. Peace.
for all of those of you who have watched with us, I really appreciate you being here with us. And we ask that you just continue to support us, like, subscribe, share this video with someone that you feel has been valuable for them as well. As always, I'm Frederick Douglass Bussey. Ever forward.